A Flourish writer believes in the power of her story, the gospel made alive as a declaration to this generation. She cultivates the courage to dream, write, and publish the story inside her. Welcome to Flourish Writers.
Hello and welcome to the Flourish Writers Conference. I am your co-host, Jenny Cokerts, and I am particularly thrilled about the interview today because there's a bit of a story, which we're not going to get into, but I have wanted to have Kathi Lipp as part of the Flourish Writers Conference for quite some time, and my wish came true, and she is here. So I am thrilled. Thank you, Kathi, so much for being here.
Jenny, you can just say that I totally dogged you. Well, can I just say, because I've been invited to do a lot of these things, and I until I got to know you, I didn't know that you're all about giving value to your audience. I've been parts of others that have not been that way. And so once I got to know you and your heart, I'm like, sign me up, sign me up. So I am thrilled to be here. And I regret telling you no before, but you know I doubly want to be here because I said no before.
I know. It is going to be such a blessing to our participants and those watching, because we're going to be talking about something that I think is such an important topic as a communicator, as a writer, and that's podcasting. And that's something that you know a lot about. So why don't you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself and about Communicator Academy?
Well, so I really started as a speaker and then became a writer, and I am the author of 17 books, mostly with Harvest House Publishers, Focus on the Family, and some other publishers, and I'm going to be publishing with Zondervan later this year. And so as I was writing all these books, but my true love is speaking. And let's be honest, the amount of actual speaking engagements out there is going down. There are a lot of people who try to tell you that, you know, you can do all this through speaking in person, but it's just not true because there's so much available video-wise and things like that. And so when podcasting came out, my husband and I thought, well, this is a good fit, but we didn't know if it'd be a thing or not. So about 5 years ago, we started our first podcast and have been going strong ever since. And we now have 2 podcasts. We have one, I call it my outward facing topic, which is called Clutter-Free Academy, which is all about decluttering your life. And then our other podcast is for communicators, like the people here who are at the Flourish Gathering. And that is for writers, speakers, podcasters, and bloggers and videoers. Oh, do you want me to answer? Oh, no.
All right, so I don't want to assume that everybody knows what podcasting is. So can you tell us a little bit, what is podcasting and why are you particularly so passionate about podcasting?
Yeah, so podcasting, what it is, it's an audio recording that is, it's kind of like a blog post, but it's audio. And so for a lot of people, we send it directly to their email address and they can download it there. Or you can get onto a podcast aggregator and just subscribe. So we have a lot of people who subscribe, and every Monday Communicator Academy shows up on their phone, and every Tuesday Clutter-Free Academy shows up on their phone. So you don't have to go looking for it. When you find a podcast you love, it can be delivered directly to you. And I just think it's I love it for a couple of reasons. As a listener, I love it because we're busy. We're driving, doing dishes. We have a mountain house that requires a ton of work. And to be able to digest 15 minutes or 30 minutes, whatever the size of the podcast is, and get that little bit of information is just the best thing ever. I love a good multitask. And so I look forward to it. It's kind of like when I was growing up, you had to wait for TV shows to come on, like
Right.
on Thursday night for Friends. And that's kind of what podcasting is to me. Or if a podcast's been around for a while and you really love it, then you can Netflix binge that podcast and listen to all the episodes.
So as a communicator, why do you see benefits for writers and communicators with podcasting?
So here's what I would say. I feel like we have to define who would be a good podcaster to say that. If you hate speaking, if that's like your, on your passion list, it's number 72, podcasting is not for you. But if you're already a speaker, I'm a speaker who writes. Lots of people are writers who speak, and they can still be great podcasters. But if you're a speaker who writes or just a speaker, podcasting can be great for you. If it does take some training because it is 15 minutes. And I have listened to a lot of podcasts it took them 15 minutes to get going, and that just kills me. But I love when a podcaster infuses a little of their personality. But if you can get one idea across in 15 minutes, explain it well, go a little in depth. And that's why podcasting is so good when you have a specific area of expertise, because a podcast can make you go deeper. And that's what I love. So like one of the podcasts that we're working on developing right now is how to be a great, a writer without pushing yourself, without being a salesperson. Now, most of the world does not need to listen to that, but there's a very thin slice of people who listen to our podcast where they're going to be like, that is the information I need to know. And that's why I love podcasts, because we can give not general answers, but very specific.
That's great. And how about, where should somebody start a podcast? Is this something that someone should jump in, right, as a kind of beginner writer? Or is this something that you want to develop a little bit of your community, a bit of your brand, and then start podcasting? Is there an ideal time?
No, there's not an ideal time. And when should you start? Yes. So here's the only thing I would say. A lot of people want to start a really general podcast because they just want to talk about the things they love. Nobody wants to listen to that podcast except for your mom. Your kids don't even want to listen to that podcast. Let's be super clear. So when you've kind of figured out your niche, that's when, whether that's before you've written your book, while you're writing your book, or after. So my Clutter-Free podcast came, I would say, about a year. We really decided to make it clutter-free about 6 months after the book was written.
Okay.
But if you are, if you're a writer and you're looking for a book deal or you're looking to self-publish, of course, I'm sure you guys have talked about it on here, platform.
Right.
And so you're trying to prove either to yourself or to a publisher that your idea, your specific slice of knowledge is appealing to enough people. And if you have a podcast that has even 5,000 downloads a month, and I know that sounds crazy huge, but I promise you, if you've got a great idea, you can have 5,000 downloads in a month. And that shows an editor that there is something there that you can do this. And it's such an inexpensive way to test out your idea and get material. It's so great. It's so great.
Are there different types of podcasts?
Yeah, so I really think a lot of podcasts are very much the entertainment segment. So a lot of these true crime things, some people would call them informative. I would say that they're more entertainment because you're hooked to a story. So there's serial podcasts where they're telling a story over time. Mine is more informative and motivating. Okay. So I want you to go clean out your sock drawer. This is very important in my life because I believe once you start with your sock drawer and you can go to the rest of your house, it impacts the rest of your life. So mine is more about go do this. And same with Communicator Academy. We're trying to give you great information that you can act on. There are some that are, they're all interview. Now, I do some interviews as well, but I want them to be connected to my main topics, which are communication or clutter. But there are some that they just get on and they have a great conversation. And I love those kind of podcasts to be able to go deeper and find out behind the books I love, behind the shows I love, that kind of thing. So it almost is as varied as different kind of blogs or different kind of books. That's how varied a podcast can be.
And what about having to have or not have a co-host? What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, I love a good co-host because I love the chemistry there, and I've had a couple of great co-hosts. On my Communicator podcast, I have Michelle Cachat, who is just a genius and a communication nerd like me. And on my Clutter-Free Academy, I've had a couple of great podcast hosts. One of them, Erin McPherson, who's a young mom. She has lots of, she has 3 kids, so she has a very different perspective than I do. And right now it's Tanya Kubo, who leads our Clutter-Free Academy on Facebook. So she's got and both she and I had parents who were hoarders. So, we come from deep life experience. You don't have to go have a co-host. I'll just say this, Jenny, all the podcasts I listen to are co-hosted. Now, what I will say with that is, I think because of the chemistry, and I want to be a part of that conversation. But when I have a guest on, I don't normally have Tanya on because I have that guest that I can interact with. So if you're doing all interviews, you probably don't need a co-host. But if you're just discussing ideas or it's entertainment, I would definitely consider a great co-host and discuss it beforehand. Know your role. In Clutter-Free Academy, I'm kind of the expert, and Tanya comes at me with the questions and things like that. Michelle and I are experts together, but we have different strengths. And so we will often defer to each other because we know the other person has that strength.
That's a great idea. And I'm glad I thought of that. So if somebody wants to get started podcasting, what would you recommend as the very first step?
So know your lane. What is it that, you have to know don't do a podcast just because you need to have a certain number of followers to put it on a book proposal. Because, you have to be in love with communicating this way. So if you have a great idea, and let me be honest with you, Jenny, my podcast went through an evolution. It started off as a podcast where I was very general because we didn't know what we were doing. And I was originally going to do it with a large ministry. And I decided that it wasn't a good fit. But we started off by calling the podcast, So Here's the Thing with Kathi, Lipp. It was very general. And then I got a cease and desist letter from Alec Baldwin.
What?
The movies, I know, crazy, right? So little did I know at that time, you could trademark your podcast titles. I had no idea.
That's good to know.
So, good to know. So his trademark was, So Here Is the Thing with Alec Baldwin. And I had no idea. And it wasn't even an active podcast. But when you're a movie star and a multimillionaire, you can cease and desist all day long. And so fortunately, because I live near Cupertino, California, where Apple is, I had a friend on the inside who was able to find out what was going on. So we changed the name. We changed the name twice until we really narrowed down on Clutter-Free Academy. So know what your slice is. Nobody needs any more general podcasts. This American Life is taken. Jamie Ivy's Happy Hour is taken. You need to know what your expertise is. That's your very first step.
That's such a great point. First, about just knowing where your expertise is, where you're unique, because there's a lot of podcasters out there.
Right.
There's a big sea of podcasting. I love that. And then I also love the point of just researching. And, I think so much we learn from observation of other podcasters we might enjoy. Kind of what are they doing? How are they doing things? How are they conducting their podcasts? What about on the tech side? Because I know that can be very intimidating.
Oh, for sure, 100%. So I would say this, if tech is not your bag at all, there are so many moms at home who are willing to do this for you at not too expensive of a cost. So if you really are tech phobic and you don't have a ton of money, then what I would say is do the one shot podcast. So that's where you get on the podcast and you say, we're not editing this. We're just going to keep moving forward. So it can't be too formal. It has to be very conversational, but the less time spent editing, the less it's going to cost you and the less hard it's going to be. Now, let me be completely honest, tech is not my deal. I started off by doing all of this, but things have changed. So one of the things that we want to offer to your people is my husband, who is the tech guy, but he has the supernatural spiritual gift, Jenny, of being able to explain tech to non-techie people without making them feel stupid. He's the gift. And so he is going to he has put together, and we're updating it now, a sheet of tech, the basics to get you started. And you can start, honestly, with your cell phone. You could absolutely start that way. It's not going to be great quality, and you're not going to love it for long. You're going to want to get better. But you can actually, it's kind of like what we're doing now. And I know a lot of people, what they do is they just hop on a Zoom call. Yep. And they turn off the video and they just have a conversation, and that's their podcast. Now, as you get a little bit more grown up and as you want to attract more people, you're going to want to add things like music. Now, don't download that Bon Jovi album that you listened to in high school, because you'll get in a lot of trouble. You can buy non-royalty music. And that's what we have at the beginning and end of both of our podcasts. So you're going to want to do that. You're going to want a little bit of editing. You're going to want a little bit of spit and polish. But honestly, most of that can be done very inexpensively with an audio editor, some software, and just doing it on Zoom. If you're going to start and try and see if you like this, my real recommendation is, before you go public, you record 8 podcasts, edit them, and see if you fall in love with the process. Because if you don't fall in love with the process, you're not going to do it for much longer. There are a million podcasts out there that have been started and ended.
I can imagine. They're the graveyard of podcasts.
Exactly.
I can imagine. So your guide is going to be very, very helpful. Your equipment guide.
I can't wait, yes.
So thank you for offering that for our community.
Of course.
All right. Probably one of the biggest questions we get, and we're going to go ahead and wrap up with this question.
Okay.
You know, we always get asked, well, how do you find time to write? How do you find time to do this?
Yeah.
And I know a little bit of your secret, but how do you find time for podcasting?
Gosh, I don't even know if it's a secret, so you may have to remind me what it is of it. But here's part of it. So part of what we do is we do a bunch of podcasts on one day. So when it's Michelle and I or Tanya and I, what we'll do is Tanya will prep half of them and I'll prep half of them. And so it's just an outline, and we have a basic outline that we use each and every time. It's just a few questions, because here's the thing. I know some podcasters are very formal and they have a list of very specific questions, and I think that's great. Usually what happens to me is I get into the first or second question, and then I start to want to know different things. I'm very curious about this kind of stuff. So I will take it in a totally different direction. But so we will batch these. So we batch them, and then I also have team members who help me with some of the stuff. Now, when I first started out, the team was this. This was the whole team. And I will say my husband helped me too. But, it's a matter of saying it doesn't have to be perfect. We allot 30 minutes for each podcast, where we're trying to get between 15 and 20 minutes of content. So if I wanted it to be perfect, I would need to allot an hour and a half of recording time. That is never going to happen. I would rather be consistent and casual than particular and perfect and not produce as much as I would like to. So that's part of it. And also, we take the whole summer off from recording podcasts. And because that's the time we want to spend with family. We have a mountain retreat where we have no internet. I'm there this summer, and this is why I'm at my mom's house right now. But to say, here's the time I do this. I'm very particular about, I don't have to-do lists. I block things out on my calendar. And I don't have little kids at home, let me be honest with you, but I did raise 4 kids. So I do remember this. And being able to block that time off was so key to be able to get the things that I could only do when the kids were occupied. And so instead of saying, okay, that's when I'm going to do dishes, I can do dishes anytime, but I can only podcast when I don't have kids around. So to really think about it in those ways is really important.
That's very helpful. And yes, the secret was batching. And I just think that you got it right.
Oh, good.
I think a lot of us, it's hard to think in terms of batching,
Right.
but I think it is so efficient for time. Okay, I know that I told you that was the last question, but I thought
That's
of
okay.
one more. Because after writing 17 books, and we have a huge community of writers and aspiring writers, I want to know, what is your number one tip for writers?
Yeah.
Whether you can encourage or equip them.
Write 500 words a day.
Okay.
Write 500 words a day. And Jenny, you know this because you were at one of our writing retreats. And what I've come to, 500 words used to take me hours. And now 500 words takes me about 45 or 50 minutes. And because it's a training process, it really is. And so if you can't do 500 words yet, my other thing would be to say, if you can only give a half hour, then do a half hour and start with, if you do 100 words in a half hour, then challenge yourself the next day, honestly, to do 101 words. And as you build it up over a year, you get to the place where in 45 minutes you are doing 500 words. I promise you. It's a discipline and it's like an exercise. You know, right now I'm working hard to lose weight and I am increasing my exercise by 1 minute a day because that doesn't scare me.
Right.
But when you say, okay, I have to do 500 words in 45 minutes, that may be overwhelming, but just do it in increments. I promise you, you'll get there.
I agree. Writing is so much of a muscle, like you said, that you have to build, and it does take work, and it is intimidating, especially if you, like you said, are a speaker who writes, which is very much myself as well.
Yeah.
You know, I did have to start really, even if you have to start with 50 words.
Right.
And then be consistent. What I think you're saying is the consistency is what pays off in the long run.
Yeah, I write 6 days a week.
Right.
And now some of that writing is for books. Some of it is for blog posts. Some of it is for newsletters that we do. But every day, and here's the thing, it can also help me predict when I'm going to get assignments in and things like that. Because if I know I'm doing 500 words a day, I'm able to say, yes, I can get that article to you, you know, Hearts at Home or Girlfriends in God in 2 weeks. I can do those things. The other thing is having a buddy to hold you accountable. That's the other thing.
Yeah. Well, great. I loved this conversation. Kathi,
Me
thank
too.
you so much for being a part of the Flourish Writers Conference. Thank you for joining us. It is our mission and our prayer that through this conference, you've been able to dream, write, and publish the story inside of you. And podcasting is such a great tool to get that story out of your heart, to get that message that you have out of your heart and into the hearts in the lives of others to really make an impact. So thank you again, Kathi.
Oh, Jenny, it was a privilege and an honor to be with you guys. And I just love what you're doing for writers. It makes me so happy.
All right. We will catch you on the next interview.